July 13th, 2024. Well, I want to focus on this video on the NATO summit of 75th anniversary, and of course how it relates to the ongoing Ukraine war. And so I'll get into that. The other thing, at the end of this video, I do want to make a few comments on the domestic political situation as well, but the main focus here is on that. Now, as far as the summit, of course, they continue their promise to eventually bring Ukraine into NATO. However, until they really can't bring Ukraine into NATO until Ukraine wins the war and effectively gets a peace settlement with the Russians, which doesn't seem to be possible that they're going to actually successfully achieve their war aims. And so, for the moment, it's more of a fig leaf or something hanging out in the future, but it isn't anything that's going to happen anytime soon. Of course, there's ongoing promises that the F-16s are just about to arrive, of course, and so forth. And so I think that, of course, Zelensky got introduced as President Putin. I thought that was a funny incident before Biden corrected himself. But then again, we all have little slips of the tongue on that. The problem with Biden isn't that. The problem with Biden is everything else he does. But it isn't just occasionally, mixing up names. That happens to about everybody, I think. But the what does happen is fundamentally not having the facts together on key issues. So that's kind of the situation. That there are a few developments. Of course, one of the developments in Ukraine, of course, was the attack on, or the bomb, or what do you want to call it, that hit the children's hospital. And of course, that's become a big propaganda push by the Ukrainians, with everybody immediately accepting that Russia deliberately targeted a children's hospital. I mean, and of course, I've been posted on X my own rebuttal to that concept. Which I think is ridiculous on a variety of grounds, which I can explain. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like. It helps the algorithms. We're looking for more subscriptions as always. Thanks to those who have. And of course, I will. You can click the bell for notifications, and you can look for also on those that get to this through a social media link. If you're on Rumble instead of YouTube, you can of course subscribe to me there. So anyway, so let's go into the issue of that, which I think was one provocation that was there. And what happened was there was a substantial Russian missile attack, including 5 Iskanders that came down on Kyiv, and apparently set off secondary explosions. So they were clearly targeting military targets. But the claim is that a cruise missile hit the children's hospital. And this was obviously subsequent to the Iskander strikes. Now, apparently, but in close coordination with it, almost the same time on target within a minute or so or two or whatever, real close. Of course, that is, first of all, let's accept the fact. Ukraine and Russia both lie a lot, okay? So they're both are not exactly upfront and honest about many issues, as we could well know. On the basis of logic, which is more the point. Does it make sense that Russia, even if you assume they're very bad people, would just choose right on the brink of a NATO summit where they may be discussing how much additional support to give to Ukraine, they would launch a cruise missile attack on a children's hospital? I mean, what is that supposed to do? It would seem to me that would strengthen Ukraine's position that they need more support, more air defense, more weapons. And so if it has any impact at all, it's favorable to Ukraine. So that would be the last thing I would think that Russia would want to do at exactly that moment. But then, they do strange things. But the other aspect is there's clearly video that's been produced at the time of the attack with the Iskander explosions in the background, of what's obviously an AIM-120 missile, which is in this case not launched from an aircraft. They don't have the F-16s yet. This was no doubt launched from the NSAM's point defense system. presumably trying to target an Iskander, and presumably it didn't get close enough for its proximity fuse to detonate the warhead, so it comes down and hits something on the ground and detonates. And I think the Russian position is that that's what hit the hospital. Ukraine, of course, is claiming that it was a KH-101, I think it is, cruise missile, and they claim they pulled components out of the hospital. But the point is, a missile of that size is a much bigger warhead. And given that there was only 2 people killed and 10 wounded in the whole hospital attack, doesn't sound to me the level of damage that would probably occur with a large cruise missile. This is a heavy cruise missile. So, and definitely not an Iskander. No, it was a cruise. So my guess is that the damage would be a lot more, and therefore that's not correct. Remember, they have plenty of the debris from these missiles, so they definitely could come up with some debris and say, hey, this is what did it. The other argument I'd make is, if I'm wrong about this, well then where did the AMRAAM missile land, and what did it destroy? So, but based on that, I can assume that really was just a tragedy that, that one of the defense missiles has to come down somewhere, and so it came down, in this case, on the hospital. But that's the kind of thing that happens. It gets blown up in the propaganda thing to make you, get more angry at Russia and want to, send in more weapons, and let's go ahead and, launch more attacks on Russia because of how bad. But I think this is just what happens when anti-aircraft fire does come down on the ground. So anyway, that's one development which I think is interesting and notable. The other thing I'd like to point out is that did seem to come out of an agreement between Poland and Ukraine, which seems to be about to be implemented. So what we're talking about here is an idea that essentially there are areas along the border between Ukraine and Poland where there are bases where NATO officers and personnel coordinate with Ukrainian intelligence personnel and so forth to provide intel and maybe strategic guidance for the war and so forth. And these facilities, also there are probably warehouses there where war material is being shipped in and transshipped into Ukraine. And so what's been happening because of this is that Russia's been using missile strikes to attack these facilities and destroying the equipment, and they presumably have actually also killed a fair number of NATO personnel in some of these attacks. So I guess in order to protect this, the deal is sort of along the lines of, and the other part of the background is there's been some effort by Ukraine to get Poland to give up their Patriot systems to them. But the deal is apparently something different. What they're going to do is they're going to move the Patriot air defense systems on the Polish side of the border, but very close to the border, to give as much range as they can into Ukraine. And then the idea is when the Russian missiles come in approaching these areas to attack targets that will be on the Ukrainian side, they will be intercepted by these Patriot systems fired by the Polish military. And so this is, in a way, this is an escalatory move, because this will be NATO overt military forces directly fighting Russian assets. I mean, up to now, it's all been done through surrogates, right? I mean, you give weapons to the Ukrainians and they fight, or you have people that are going in, as they call it, sterile, not in uniform, that are advisors or technical support, or even open fighters for the Ukrainians, maybe in Ukrainian uniform, and volunteers or whatever. And that's what we've been seeing up to now. But here you'll be having actual NATO military units firing on Russian missiles from NATO territory. And so I think in a sense that is an escalatory move, and it seems like this is about to happen. I don't believe there's been an incident yet, but and we'll see whether this deters the Russians from the attacks, or, as I suspect, they'll go ahead and do them anyhow, if nothing else, to test how effective this will be. And there are some risks here. For one thing, if they damage a missile, a cruise missile, and it goes out of control and flies into Poland and detonates, then they'll be screaming Russia's attacked Poland, right? And we could get into an Article 5 situation. There's also the possibility that Russia will directly attack these air defense systems. I mean, you can't rule it out. And that would be the situation where, we've been trying to avoid a direct conflict, which then Poland, I guess, could ask for some kind of intervention under Article 5. And again, it's hard to know what we really would do if that happens. That's another issue. I mean, and that's probably beyond the scope of this discussion to get into that. But that is in the offing here. And so we'll see. The other thing that's in the offing, which is also is the delivery of the F-16s, is apparently they're soon to arrive into the combat. And it's unclear whether they're going to be strictly based inside of Ukraine or whether they'll be based, say, in Romania or Poland as a home base, and then they will presumably fly into Ukraine to some forward operating base and refuel an arm there, and then take off and attack the targets, and then fly back into back into NATO countries for protection in between missions. And one other reason why they would probably have to do this would be, of course, the Ukraine is not a small country, and you'd use up a fair amount of your fuel if you came in fully armed to do the attack. So you probably would want to come in to a forward operating base, fuel up there, arm up there, and then do the attack, and then you could conceivably fly back. And I think that seems to be the method that's being discussed. We'll see what actually happens when these aircraft go into action. In preparation, Russia's been attacking a variety of Ukrainian air bases and have destroyed some aircraft. I mentioned that in a previous video. And of course, if they damage these bases enough, it may be somewhat difficult, to operate the F-16s there. The other thing is the F-16 is not a very good rough field plane. With its air scoop right down near the ground, you have to watch out for FOD damage and stuff like that. So, just saying that debris on the airfield can be a problem there with that kind of an airplane. So anyhow, that's, and then the other development, of course, was that the new British Prime Minister, I think, said it's okay for them to use the Storm Shadow missiles to attack inside of Russia pretty much without restriction. So that's another thing that will be coming up, a little bit of an escalation. So that's kind of what's come out of this whole, summit and the developments. On the ground, I think the war continues as I've described before. That every day you see some additional Russian advances. They're relatively small and slow, but they're continuous. And presumably this has a grinding effect on the Ukrainian military. As far as we can tell, because of the firepower imbalances in most sectors, not every sector, but in most sectors, the exchange ratio in terms of losses is in favor of Russia. So Ukraine, with a smaller population, is losing a lot of people relative to the Russian casualties. And that can be a long-term problem. But in the meantime, the war continues. And I would say that it was, given that Orban had his little peace initiative, or what you want to call it, went to Moscow and talked to Putin and talked to Zelensky and Kyiv, and that apparently some of his people have also are talking to some of Trump's people. So in the U.S. So I don't know. Trump is promising some kind of a peace initiative. I think he's exaggerating his effectiveness, but it would seem to behoove Russia to conquer all the territory they really want to get before the next presidential term, because they might find themselves kind of in a stalemate after that if they decide to go along with this peace initiative. And I think that would include the bulk of Donbass. So I think they have most of Luhansk. So I don't think they're going to be able to take the parts of Kherson that are on the west side of the Dnieper River, or I think a lot of Zaporizhia. They're going to have to compromise in that scenario, I would think. Although we'll see. That's just another thing that'll be months away to know how that's going to go. So anyway, but I would like to comment a little bit before, as I close this up, about the presidential situation in the U.S. like I promised at the beginning. And we saw the Biden press conference, And I think he did better than that than he did in the debate. It was kind of a typical Biden performance. A couple of notorious gaffes, although they're so obviously not what he meant to say that I don't know what that implies. I mean, it's the kind of thing, when he introduced Zelensky as President Putin or something like that. It's like when you're, but I don't think that's the main flaw with it. The fact that it was more that the overall thing just kind of shows that he chugs along at some kind of pace. I would say that it did reveal that he basically does know the issues. It's just he's not very crisp presenting them. But apparently this has buoyed the Biden team to hang on, while other powerful forces, probably led by Obama and the Hollywood set and a lot of the big money fundraisers are still pushing even harder to get Biden to quit the race. So we'll just have to stay tuned in. I discussed that in the last video, kind of what I thought about it. I mean, the longer this goes on, the better for us. And if Biden somehow does get the nomination, that would be just great for us, because then I think we'd be in a good shape to win for sure. Uh, um, but the danger is, of course, if Biden is replaced with a more effective candidate, uh, somebody probably other than Kamala Harris, then you have a whole different situation. And for instance, some of these people, such as Whitmer of Michigan, might preclude our ability to win Michigan, for instance, as a possibility. And that would be whereas I don't think Biden has any effect of that sort. So anyway, I'll be wrapping this up for now. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. All for now.